Saturday afternoon in Springfield carried the same peaceful rhythm as any other day. Families strolled leisurely through the park, children played on the swings, and neighbors exchanged friendly greetings. But for Malcolm Carter, today was special. He had spent weeks working at a small cafe near his school, carefully saving every penny to buy a meaningful birthday gift for his little sister. And finally, after days of searching, he had found the perfect one, a beautiful charm bracelet displayed inside the glass case of Golden Grace Jewelers. As Malcolm stepped through the store's elegant glass doors, the soft chime of the entrance bell echoed through the bright showroom. The space gleamed under the warm lights, reflecting off the sparkling gemstones in their pristine displays. Yet, the moment he entered, he sensed an unspoken tension in the air. Behind the counter stood Susan Miller, a middle-aged woman with neatly tied-back hair and sharp, watchful eyes. The instant she saw Malcolm, her expression shifted, her lips pressed into a firm line, her gaze turned cold and guarded. Her fingers instinctively tightened around her phone as if she were holding onto a lifeline. Malcolm was no stranger to that look. It was the look of doubt, of suspicion, of quiet prejudice he had encountered more times than he cared to remember. But he refused to let it shake him. Taking a steady breath, he walked toward the display case, his eyes scanning for the bracelet he had set his heart on. Susan's stare never wavered, following his every move as though expecting him to do something wrong. The tension in the room grew heavier with each passing second, but Malcolm ignored it, focusing only on his purpose. After a few moments, he found what he was looking for. With a polite smile, he pointed at the silver bracelet with a delicate star-shaped charm. "I'd like to see that one, please." But Susan had no intention of helping him. She folded her arms across her chest, scrutinizing him from head to toe before speaking in a slow, doubtful tone. "Are you sure? It's very expensive." A cold shiver ran down Malcolm's spine. He knew exactly what she meant. She didn't think he belonged here. He wasn't the kind of customer she expected to see in this store. But he refused to let her intimidate him. Keeping his voice calm, he pulled out his wallet and opened it, revealing the neatly saved cash he had worked so hard for. "Yes, I'm sure. I have the money right here." Instead of looking relieved, Susan grew even more suspicious. Her eyes flicked between his wallet and the security camera mounted on the ceiling. A new layer of unease settled over her face. "Wait here," she said, her voice laced with hesitation. "I need to call the store owner first." But Malcolm was about to learn that Susan wasn't calling the owner at all. Instead, she was dialing 911, setting off a chain of events that would turn his simple shopping trip into a nightmare of injustice. Malcolm felt his stomach tighten as he watched Susan bring the phone to her ear. Something about her demeanor unsettled him, the stiffness in her posture, the way her eyes darted between him and the exit, as if she were preparing for something bigger than a simple call to the store owner. "This is Susan Miller from Golden Grace Jewelers," she spoke into the phone, her voice deliberately calm yet laced with a performative concern. "There's a suspicious individual in my store. Young, black, and acting very nervous. I think he might be trying to steal something." Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. Did she really just call the police on him? He had done nothing wrong, nothing but walk into a store and try to buy a gift for his sister. And yet, here he was, being treated like a criminal. His pulse pounded in his ears as a wave of frustration, anger, and disbelief washed over him. "Ma'am, I haven't done anything," he said, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. Susan barely acknowledged his words. Instead, she gave him a smug, condescending smile. "Then you have nothing to worry about," she said coolly. "The police will sort it out." Malcolm clenched his fists at his sides, his heartbeat accelerating. He had heard stories like this before, seen videos online of young black men being profiled, humiliated, or worse, all because someone decided they looked suspicious. He never thought it would happen to him, not like this, not today. The piercing sound of approaching sirens shattered the heavy silence in the store. Within minutes, 2 police officers barged through the door, their hands resting near their holsters. "There he is," Susan declared, pointing at Malcolm as though identifying a dangerous fugitive. I caught him trying to rob the store. One of the officers, Sergeant Daniels, immediately reached for his handcuffs. Son, I'm going to need you to step outside. Malcolm could feel every eye in the store on him. The humiliation burned deep, but he forced himself to take a steady breath. He had one card left to play, one that would change everything. He looked straight at the officers and, with a quiet confidence, uttered 5 words that would turn the situation on its head. Call my mom right now. Susan rolled her eyes at Malcolm's words, her smirk barely concealed. Oh sure, she said mockingly. I'm sure she'll be so helpful. Who is she? A public defender? Malcolm didn't respond. He simply pulled out his phone and, with a steady hand, dialed the one person who could end this nightmare in an instant. Mom, I need you at Golden Grace now. His voice was calm, but there was an unshakable firmness beneath it. Minutes passed, each one stretching unbearably long. The officers grew impatient, shifting on their feet, while Susan's smug expression remained firmly in place. She clearly believed she had won, that she had successfully handled the situation. Then the store doors swung open, and everything changed. A tall, commanding black woman stepped inside, her sharp navy suit crisp, her posture unwavering. Her presence alone was enough to silence the room, demanding respect before she even spoke a word. Her deep brown eyes swept over the scene, assessing everything in seconds, the officers, Susan, and most importantly, her son. Susan, still oblivious to the reality unfolding before her, let out a relieved sigh. Ma'am, thank goodness you're here, she began, assuming the woman was just another officer arriving to back up her claim. I caught this young man trying to. Before she could finish, the woman calmly reached into her blazer and pulled out a badge. Not just any badge, the kind that made even the officers straighten up in an instant. I'm Special Agent Regina Carter, she announced, her voice steady, powerful, and full of authority. Chief of the FBI's Criminal Division. And I'm also this young man's mother. The air in the store turned to ice. Sergeant Daniels gulped audibly. The second officer took a nervous step back. Even the store manager, who had been watching in stunned silence, looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. But no one was more shaken than Susan. Her smug confidence evaporated in an instant. Her face paled, her lips trembled, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she was speechless. Regina's gaze locked onto the officers first. You are about to arrest my son, she said, her voice cool yet laced with quiet fury. Did you even ask for his side of the story? Did you check the security footage? Or did you just take her word for it? Sergeant Daniels stammered, his face burning with embarrassment. We were just following protocol. Regina's eyes narrowed. Protocol, she repeated, her tone sharp as a blade. Protocol means investigating before making assumptions. But you didn't do that, did you? Neither officer could find the words to respond. Then, slowly, Regina turned to Susan. And you, she said, her voice dripping with controlled anger. You accused my son of stealing. Why? Did he do anything illegal? Or was the color of his skin enough for you to call 911? Susan's lips parted, but no words came out. Her hands shook slightly, and her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. I was just trying to be careful, she stammered weakly. Regina didn't let her finish. Oh, you were careful, all right, she said icily. Careful enough to ruin your own career. Because this, she gestured around the store, at the officers, at the onlookers, and finally at Malcolm, who had been recording everything with his phone, is going viral. Susan's face drained of all color. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Please. I didn't mean any harm. Regina wasn't interested in excuses. Instead, she turned to the store manager, whose horrified expression said it all. I assume you don't support racial profiling in your business, she asked. The manager, looking utterly mortified, shook his head furiously. Absolutely not. Then, without hesitation, he turned to Susan. Susan, "You're fired. Get your things and leave. Now." Susan gasped, her eyes darting between them, searching for sympathy. But there was none to be found. Karma had struck instantly. As Susan gathered her belongings and shuffled toward the exit, Malcolm finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "All I wanted was to buy a bracelet," he said. Then, with a quiet smile, he added, "Guess I got something more valuable instead. Justice." And with that, the boy she tried to humiliate walked out of the store with his head held high, while she walked out in disgrace. As Malcolm and his mother stepped out of the store, the tension inside still lingered like a storm that had just passed, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Regina Carter walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished floor as if marking the rhythm of justice itself. Malcolm, still shaken but holding his head high, glanced at his mother, the weight of the moment settling in. He had always known his mother was powerful, but seeing her in action was something else entirely. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or threaten anyone, just her presence, her authority, and her unwavering confidence had been enough to dismantle the injustice in front of her. They reached the sidewalk, the afternoon sun casting a golden glow over the streets. Malcolm let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Mom, how did you know exactly what to say?" he asked, his voice filled with both admiration and disbelief. Regina gave him a knowing smile, tucking her badge back into her blazer. "Because I've seen it happen too many times," she said simply. "And I refuse to let it happen to my son." Malcolm felt a mix of gratitude and frustration. Gratitude because his mother had saved him. Frustration because it had come to this in the first place. "I didn't even do anything," he muttered, shaking his head. "I know," Regina said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And that's the problem. You shouldn't have to prove your innocence just for existing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them carried on as usual, cars passing by, people strolling along the sidewalks, laughter echoing from a nearby cafe. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just minutes ago. Regina finally sighed and glanced down at Malcolm's phone, where the recording was still saved. "What do you plan to do with that?" she asked. Malcolm stared at the screen for a long moment before locking it. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But people need to see what really happened." Regina nodded in understanding. "Then use it wisely," she advised. "You have a voice, Malcolm. Make sure you use it to bring change, not just outrage." He looked up at her, seeing not just his mother, but the woman who had spent her life fighting battles most people never even realized were being fought. "Come on," she said, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Let's go home." As they walked away, Malcolm knew one thing for sure, his mother wasn't just any woman. She was a force to be reckoned with. Inside the store, the air remained thick with unease. Even though Regina Carter had already made her authority clear, she wasn't finished. She turned back to the two police officers, her sharp gaze landing on Sergeant Daniels first. "You were about to arrest my son," she repeated, her voice calm but unyielding. "Did you even stop to think? Did you ask for his side of the story, check security footage, or investigate in any way before jumping to conclusions?" Sergeant Daniels swallowed hard. We were just following procedure, ma'am," he stammered, avoiding her piercing stare. Regina's lips pressed into a thin line. "Procedure?" she echoed. "Tell me, Sergeant, does procedure include treating a black teenager as a suspect without any evidence? Does it include assuming guilt the moment you walk through the door?" Neither officer answered. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner for help. Regina took a slow step forward. "I have worked in law enforcement for over 2 decades. I know what proper police work looks like, and I also know what bias looks like. Today, I saw the latter." Sergeant Daniels looked down, his face flushed with shame. "We didn't mean to." Regina cut him off. "Intentions don't matter. Actions do. And your actions nearly cost an innocent young man his dignity." She then turned her attention to Susan, who stood frozen in place, her usual arrogance completely stripped away. "You had no reason to suspect my son," Regina said, her voice unwavering. "He walked into this store with money in his hand, looking to buy a gift. But instead of seeing a customer, you saw a threat." Susan's mouth opened, but no words came out. Regina's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, Ms. Miller, if my son had been a white teenager in designer clothes, would you have questioned him the same way? Would you have called the police?" Susan's lips trembled, but she couldn't deny the truth. Regina exhaled slowly. "You accused my son of something he never did. And now, you're facing the consequences of your own prejudice." The store manager, still standing to the side, looked mortified. He turned to Susan, his voice sharp with finality. "I won't have this kind of behavior in my store. You're fired, Susan. Leave now." Susan let out a choked gasp. "Please, I was just trying to protect the store." "No," Regina interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "You were protecting your own biases. And now, you'll live with the consequences." Defeated, Susan gathered her belongings and walked out of the store, her head bowed in shame. As the doors swung shut behind her, Malcolm let out a quiet breath. He looked at his mother, then at the officers, who still stood there in silence. Regina turned to them one last time. "I suggest you both think long and hard about how you handle situations like this in the future," she said. "Because next time, I won't just be here as a mother, I'll be here as an investigator." Without another word, she placed a protective hand on Malcolm's back and guided him toward the exit. As they stepped outside into the bright afternoon, Malcolm felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Justice had been served. And his mother had made sure of it. As Susan stepped out of the store, the weight of humiliation pressed down on her shoulders. The world outside, which had seemed so ordinary just hours ago, now felt colder, harsher. She clutched her purse tightly, her mind racing with disbelief. Fired. Humiliated. Exposed. Everything had unraveled so quickly that she could barely process it. Meanwhile, inside the store, Malcolm stood tall, his phone still in hand. The recording had captured everything, the false accusation, the baseless call to 911, and the moment his mother had turned the situation on its head. Regina glanced at her son's phone and gave him a small nod. "People deserve to see the truth," she said, her voice measured. Malcolm took a deep breath. He had already made up his mind. Within minutes, the video was uploaded to social media, and it spread like wildfire. The injustice, the prejudice, and the swift retribution, it was a story that resonated with thousands. Comments flooded in, some expressing outrage, others cheering for Malcolm and his mother. By the time Susan reached her car, her phone buzzed incessantly with messages and notifications. Her face paled as she saw her name trending online. The video had already gained traction, with people calling for accountability. News outlets began picking up the story, amplifying her downfall even further. At the same time, the store's manager wasted no time issuing a public statement, condemning Susan's actions and reaffirming the company's stance against racial profiling. "Discrimination has no place in our business," the statement read. "We sincerely apologize to Malcolm Carter and his family for the unjust treatment he endured." Susan's world was crumbling before her eyes. A job she had taken for granted was gone. Her reputation, once secure in the comfort of her privilege, was now in ruins. She had thought she was in control of the situation, but in the end, her own prejudice had sealed her fate. Back inside the store, Malcolm turned to his mother, his expression thoughtful. "I just wanted to buy a bracelet," he murmured. Regina gave him a proud yet solemn look. "And instead, you got justice," she said. "Sometimes, that's the most valuable thing of all." With that, mother and son walked out, leaving behind the place where Malcolm had been wronged, but also where he had reclaimed his dignity. As they disappeared down the street, Susan sat in her car, staring blankly at her phone. The realization hit her all at once: this was karma, swift and unforgiving. The moments after Susan's departure felt surreal. The store, now free of tension, slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But for Malcolm, everything had shifted. His mother's stern confrontation, the swift exposure of the truth, it had all been a whirlwind. Yet, as he stood there, a calm settled over him. Regina, ever composed, took a final look around the store. She'd made her point, but she wasn't done yet. "This isn't just about you, Malcolm," she said quietly, her hand still on his shoulder. "This is about making sure something like this doesn't happen again. To you, or anyone else." Malcolm nodded, his heart still pounding from the ordeal. He understood now that it wasn't just about one humiliating moment, it was a larger fight for fairness. He had seen the power of truth, the weight of his mother's words, and the impact of a single action in changing the course of events. Outside the store, the world was quieter than it had been in the last few hours. But the ripple effect of what had just transpired was already spreading. News outlets had picked up the story, calling it a clear example of racial profiling, and the video of the incident had gone viral. People were outraged, sharing their own experiences of discrimination, but also praising the courage of Malcolm and his mother for standing up against the injustice. At the same time, Susan's life unraveled further. She was quickly becoming the face of unwarranted bias. The viral video wasn't just a glimpse into one incident, it was a powerful reminder of how prejudice could so easily be exposed and torn down. Her actions had left an indelible mark on her career, and her reputation would be forever stained by that single moment of poor judgment. For Malcolm and Regina, however, it was a moment of triumph. Justice wasn't always guaranteed to be swift or fair, but today it had been. As they reached their car, Regina turned to her son, her gaze softening. "You did well today, Malcolm," she said. "You kept your composure when it was hardest. And you used your voice when it mattered most." Malcolm smiled, the weight of the day finally beginning to lift. "I don't know if I would have been able to do it without you, Mom." Regina smiled back, the pride evident in her eyes. "You've got more strength than you think. You always have." Together, they drove home, knowing that justice had been served, not just in the store, but in the larger world that needed to see these kinds of actions for what they truly were. This was more than an isolated incident, it was a step toward the change that was needed. And with every step, they knew they were making a difference. As the day drew to a close, Malcolm sat in the quiet of his room, his thoughts still swirling. He opened his phone once more, scrolling through the comments, the messages, the outpouring of support from friends, strangers, and people who had been moved by what had happened. But beyond the likes and shares, there was something more profound, something deeper that had resonated with so many. This wasn't just about one wrongful accusation or one person being exposed for their bias. It was about a larger message, a message that Malcolm now fully understood. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. It was about refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice, knowing that your voice has the power to bring about change. And, perhaps most importantly, it was about recognizing the humanity in others, no matter their race, background, or appearance. Regina, as always, had a way of seeing the bigger picture. She had turned a painful moment into an opportunity for growth, not just for Malcolm, but for everyone who witnessed it. She'd shown him that sometimes justice comes swiftly, but it's never guaranteed, and that was why it had to be fought for. "Your story," Regina had said earlier, "has the power to make others see the truth." And it had. The video, which had initially felt like a painful necessity, had become a beacon for others who had experienced similar discrimination. People were speaking up, sharing their own stories, calling out prejudice, and acknowledging the work that still needed to be done to break down these barriers. For Malcolm, the most powerful lesson was that change wasn't easy. But it was possible. Every act of courage, every refusal to stay silent, was a step toward a better future. As he sat there, the weight of it all finally sinking in, he realized that his journey was far from over. This was just one chapter, one small moment in a larger, ongoing fight for justice and equality. But it was a start, a powerful start. With his head held high, Malcolm closed his phone and turned toward the window. The world outside was still the same, but in his heart, he knew it had shifted. He had a voice. And he wasn't going to stop using it. That was the message, the real message, that this day had left behind. Change begins when we speak up, when we refuse to let injustice stand unchecked, and when we stand together in the fight for what is right. And with that, Malcolm Carter had become a part of something much bigger than himself, a movement for justice that could never be silenced.